Welcome to Radical Recovery. I'm here with Dr. William Horton. He's going to introduce himself in a moment as part of the Radical Recovery series, the series that we're doing hosted by the Kiloby Center that really is getting into the radical roots of what drives addiction and how can we recover from it. And Dr. Horton has many years of experience. I'm going to let him introduce that experience and his relationship with addiction and recovery now.
Hi, I'm Dr. Will Horton. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, a master addictions counselor, and also a master NLP trainer and hypnotist. But I've been in the addiction field longer than anything, almost 40 years, and it's from a personal experience. Addiction took away two careers I loved, a military career, and then afterwards I became an actor and was starting to do quite well, and I ended up the addiction took those two away from me. And when I say took those two, actually, I gave them away to keep the addiction going. And so, but once I got started to get into recovery, and it took a little while, and I was having trouble with grasping all the stuff that was out there. I went through long-term treatment through the Veterans Administration in the States, and it was working, and I understood it, and I liked it, and it's very 12-step oriented, and to this day, I love the 12 steps. I'm still active. But there was something missing because a couple of years I just couldn't grasp it. And then I kind of stumbled across some hypnosis and NLP. And what it did is it coalesced everything together and it made sense. And that started me studying first NLP because while I was doing some volunteer work as an addiction counselor, I was a salesman. And back in the early 80s, NLP was, this was things for sales. And so my first question is, why aren't we using this in addictions? And then that led into hypnosis and all the other EFT and all the things that I've done since then. Because my question was and always will be in the addiction world, and this comes as a psychologist too, is one of the problems I think with psychology is we're really good at codifying a problem. We can codify a problem down to minute details. We are not good at showing you how to fix that problem. Right? And one of the things I always had a clash with, even getting my doctorate, was insight therapy. I believe in insight therapy for some things, but when it comes to an addiction, all insight therapy does is make you an insightful addict, right? And it doesn't stop the behavior. And so
I had that experience.
And I'm this because of that and all this other stuff. But my question then was, and I'll use the 12-step because it's the longest, it's been around forever. I started looking at, when I see all these people in the 12-step program that are quite successful, what are they doing different than those that don't get it? And from talking to thousands of people, it's not just going to the meetings and doing the steps, doing that. There's a whole lot of things. And lately there's been a push. One of my clashes with the current 12-step thing is, just pray, just pray, just pray. Well, if that worked, why are there so many drunk priests and drunk, very religious people? So they haven't really looked at, what's the little difference that makes the difference? And my experience in addictions, not the Babylon, but has really shifted in the last 15 or 20 years. Because I was pretty much a hardcore 12-step, let's just do this. Yes, we add the NLP and the hypnosis and mainly model what works. But then with some of the current research in neurology, neurochemicals, and all this other stuff, it opened me up. And I call it my happy rat story, if I could tell that one later. And that one really started to shift how I looked at addictions and what's the difference that makes the difference.
So I'd love to hear you talk about that a little bit more because you had a lot of experience, some of it very successful. Mm-hmm. And then what happened? What are the key things that you learned out of that?
Well, one thing is, and it kind of ties in to this happy rat story. And what that is back in I think it was late 60s or maybe early 70s, there was this study. They took some rats, right? And which is what psychologists are good at, torturing rats. And they got them hooked on, I think the first drug was cocaine. And they duplicate it with some other drugs, heroin, alcohol, and all that. But they would, especially the, cocaine and heroin. Then they'd run the ad. I still remember it. It was like it showed a rat in a cage. And it said, this rat, the one drug is so powerful that it will ignore, drops in a female, right? It will ignore mating. It will ignore food. It will drug itself to death, right? Okay, fine. So that started the whole American war on drugs even more. Drugs are bad, you
Right.
know, and so drugs are the problem, or alcohol is the problem. And, you know, I don't know why America didn't learn from damn prohibition, but, you know, it's like, so they codified the problem, which also allowed them to criminalize it, but that's a whole nother political talk. And so, okay, fine. So that started that. But some psychologists saw that study, and one of them went, there's a problem with this. And so they duplicated the study, and what they did, they got some rats hooked again, but rather than drop like food or females into this rat cage, they took the rat out of the unhappy rat cage and put it in a happy rat cage. That's where I get the happy rat. They put it in there where there was stimulation, there was food, there, of course, you know, mating, and kids seem to be important. There were kids, all this stuff was in their environment. And anybody that's ever dealt with rats knows that they're very smart. They're very social creatures. They like groups. What they found was then almost all the rats would disregard the alcohol or the drugs. Even if it was there, it would disregard it. Even if they were totally hooked before, they would drop into the happy rat cage, and you know they would disregard it. And at about the same time, this lined up with a phenomenon in America. When the Vietnam War was at its apex in the late 60s, estimates run as high as 75% of the troops were really abusing alcohol and drugs. I mean, heroin was everywhere, hashish, of course, marijuana. They had beer everywhere, you know, so guys are drinking. Seemed like, and I was in at the end of that era, you were either a doper or a drinker, right? And it was how you coped. So they were gearing up for this huge onslaught of addict soldiers coming back from the war, because, you know, there was 500,000 troops in country at any given time, several million served over the course of the war. And again, it was an unhappy war. You didn't get the, hey, what, like we get now, thank you for your service, thank you. It was like, you know, some of the stuff you're old enough and a lot of people can remember, it's not a myth when they'd spit at you and call it. And there's a lot of psychological stuff about that, one sitting in the White House. But, you know, so they were gearing up for this problem. But what they found was almost all of the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines coming back from the country, except for about 10% or less, did fine. They had a 6-month readjustment period. Mm-hmm. And then, but most of them did fine, right? And then even out of that 10% that had a lot of problems, when you spin out the people that really had severe PTSD, you know, and head trauma, which now we just really know about, you spin that off, it was that small 3-5% of the people that really needed alcohol and drug counseling or some kind of help. But what was even more fascinating on a longer term follow-up, a lot of these soldiers that were alcoholics or drug addicts by definition and diagnosis in Vietnam, you run into them 20 years later, they'll drink a beer and it doesn't cause them to go off on a 3-day binge. Not most of them that did the drugs just didn't do the drugs anymore, right? So why did that happen? And it was because they took them out of the unhappy experience and put them into a happy place. And a lot of that made me look at like, damn, maybe that's what's the difference in some of the people that, you know, and in the 12-step world, to tie it into that really quick, then it made sense to me, because in the 12-step world, they always say, change your playmates and your playpens. You got to get out of the old environment, the bars, the dope houses, which makes sense. Well, once you're out of that, it's where do you go next, right? And if you drop into something stimulating and challenging and bonding, then it takes off, right? And so that just shifted how I looked at addictions, which then I dropped my bias, you know, my selection bias. So I actually started researching, and then they found now all the stuff we know about the neurochemicals with addiction, you know, and how the dopamine and serotonin gets out of whack, and, you know, what can recause it. And you know, one of the things we know is prayer, meditation, hypnosis, altered state works, or being in a group of like-minded people resets the neurochemicals. So that's why the 12-step program can work, and some other stuff. So that's kind of like, that started me on this whole different thing. And then I spent a few years just talking to lots and lots of people, especially the ones that could get sober or clean, and those that God love them, they just don't get it.
Mm-hmm.
And whether it's, and I've seen them, and that's why, and you've been around the field, that's why, when you get open, you see people that recover through the 12 steps, you see people recover through therapy, you see people get spiritual, you see people get into physical. One of my person I interviewed became a bodybuilder, and now they're 20 years later, they're still working out, they're looking great, they haven't drank or drugged since. Some get into their family, some people even get into their careers. If they take their career. So a lot of it has to do with that kind of thinking, what's going on inside. And that's kind of my story in a nutshell.
Well, I think it's fascinating that medical science now is doing so much research. It really does help.
Well, and I always said, if addiction counselors and people that did addictions were heart doctors, we would all be sued for malpractice and put out of business, right? Because if you could say, well, 3 to 10% is, the normal success rate. And, I'm always fascinated when I see these places or people claim, I have a 75% or 100% success rate, It's like, well, that's fascinating. First, what's your methodology, and that's one of the issues I think when you get into the like the 12-step world or lay therapy or anyway, not to slam my own field, but hypnosis and NLP, is they're not trained in the methodology. I remember one guy said he had a 97% success rate. And I asked him, what's your method? Well, only 3% asked for their money back.
Oh.
And I go, so, the 10% that overdosed and died, you would count in your success pool.
Right. So how does NLP fit in with this?
Well, one of the things I think NLP, neuro-linguistic programming or neuro-linguistic psychology, depending on what term you use, it fascinated me at the get-go because it was about how you think, how you process information, not why, why can be irrelevant, why, and now one of the clashes I have in the hypnosis world, and I just put it out there, is with regression stuff. It's because if you really understand how memory works, there's no pure memory. Every time you think about a memory, you rewrite it. You make it better, you make it worse. But NLP in general just looked at like, okay, what works, what doesn't work? How do you think? What's changed in your thinking? And can we duplicate it? And it drops the why, it drops this. And so again, if you go and you talk to, people that have been successful and you start like codifying, what did they do that's a little bit different as those that fail or not be successful, that's what NLP can do. And it's how you think. And it can get you to customize whatever you're doing to fit that person's brain. And, if you've studied NLP, now it's pretty much in vernacular, that we either think in pictures, sounds, or feelings, right? And that's a big difference. And people act like it's not. But if you're a kinesthetic, you're a feeling person, and some person's talking about pictures, it doesn't resonate with you, or vice versa. If I think in pictures and you're talking feelings, I'm like, so there's that. So you can begin to codify what you're doing with however you're trying to help somebody. And again, it's the whole thing of doing some kind of structure, and that's one of the things, to back up real quick, that the 12-step world did bring to the table and still brings to the table is a structured method of change.
Right.
Rather than just, hey, come in, we'll talk, and I hate when I hear people in this, especially in the addiction field, I'll wing it. At least you gotta have some, when you have a structure, it works.
Yeah,
right?
You've got steps, you've got an outline. Yeah. So how would you start to work with somebody using NLP?
Well, the first thing I do is look for, first, how do they think? Are they visual, auditory, kinesthetic? And then what, human needs are being fulfilled by the addiction. And, I simplified how I think about human needs. We basically have 6 that we're always balancing, right? you have the need for certainty and uncertainty. You know, people either want certainty in their lives, somebody that can stay 30 years in the military, work for the government for 30 years. Certainty is important to them, right?
Yeah.
And you make them uncertain, they freak out. So maybe the addictions, because everything else in my life is freaking out. I know if I have, 6 beers and a half a pint, you're certain what's going to, even though it's going to, and again, flipping back to the NLP, it also is comforting to know that people don't have to make sense. There's no logic. So anyway, so I look at, do they want certainty or are they uncertain? Do they want uncertainty? Is if they're in a boring job, my God, I work for a factory. I've been turning a wrench the same, putting on that tire on that truck for 30 years, Well, the money's good, so I stay, but I hate it, right? So how do they get that uncertainty in their life? Well, drinking, drugging, doing that can make it uncertain. So you're always balancing that. And then the 2 big ones that people are always balancing is the need for connection. We want to connect with people, but at the same time, we want to feel significant, right? So we're always balancing that. If you go too much after significance, you lose connection. That's where you get these business people who become billionaires and, their kids don't know them. They've been married 5 times. I always think of here in the States, I make fun of politicians that after 30 years in the Senate, they go, I'm retiring to be with my family.
Right.
Well, yeah, it's like, but that significance is important. We all want to be significant. And one thing, the ultimate significant act is having children. Because you have kids for 10 years, you're the most significant being in their life, right? So you want that significance, and how do you get it, right? And sometimes addiction can get it. You're the problem child. So your parents, everybody's worried about Joe, or Julie. So they're focused, that can be significant. Or you're the person that can drink and drug more than anybody, right? I know where all the dope houses are. I can score dope. Or like, I remember when I first got out of service, I got out of service, that's a term to be used lightly. But I knew where I lived at the time, Indiana, was dry on Sunday. You couldn't buy alcohol on Sunday. I knew everywhere you could get beer and liquor on Sunday. And that made me feel cool because people would be calling me up. I was impotent, And so if I gave that up, now I'm not significant, right? So we want to be significant. There's a lot of ways we do it. And then we want connection with other people, right? But if you over-connect with people, you lose significance. That's what codependency is. I'm nothing without you. So how do you get that connection? And one of the things now we're beginning to find, some of the people, one of the theories of addiction is it's a disease of connection or disconnection, right?
That makes a lot of sense.
Because maybe growing up, and I would fit this model, started drinking alcoholically at 13. I never knew how to form a true connection adult-wise, whether it's even good friends or sexual or anything. It's like, So I don't know how to connect, but you can connect with the alcohol or the drugs. It makes you feel connected. That's why, the old drunk thing is true. Bro, I love you. And they're hanging, and then next day they don't remember who the hell they were talking, but it was that they're searching for connection. And also then what if your connection is your drinking buddies, your doping buddies, so you walk away from that, now you have no connection and you have no significance.
Right.
You've lost your identity. You're not the party guy. You're not this, you don't know, and you don't know how to connect, And so those are the 4 main ones. But then what also happens, that once I started to look at it that way, that I was exposed to that, then it made sense why I see people come into recovery. I don't care whichever mode they come in, but I used to see a lot in the 12-step. They sober up about 6, 9 months. They always say 6 months, 9 months, and a year, right? 3 months, 6 months, and a year are danger things. I always say it's like 7 months and 13 months, but because you make that goal and then you feel significant. I got my chip. But what happens is they get bored. You're not drinking now, so you're going to your meetings. Maybe, you got back with your family, you got a job, your boss ain't yelling at you. And suddenly, after about 6 months, you're like, this is boring. How many more meetings can I go to? right? And so they end up relapsing out of boredom, right? And that it kind of explained why I see people come in. One of the factors for success is if you come in and you got a family and you get the family back together, you have a higher variable to succeed. Because, you know, now you got a family, you're connected and you're reconnecting, and maybe you start doing things. And the other thing I began to see is people that got really sober at about somewhere around 6 months to a year, they start doing things, you know, whether it's go hunting, go fishing, you know, get there. That's why the 12-step program, I still like it, because you can connect with people. And you know, a lot of my friends around here, I don't like it, but they all go fishing. And they all play golf. God love them. You know, I do theater and do karate. But yeah, it's like they go start doing things, and because then you get that variety. So you got your you got your certainty and variety or uncertainty. And so, you know, that once I got those four, then I go, oh, this makes sense. And then the two needs that go above that kind of needs of the spirit are the needs for growth and connection, or growth and contribution, right? So we all want to grow and contribute, especially if you, you know, as Maslow would say, if we hit those base needs, now we want to grow and contribute. And the people I see that really recover figure out a way to grow and contribute, whether it's be active in the biggest and the easiest is get active in the 12-step community. If you're in that, you know, you chair meetings, you go to this, you become a volunteer, you do that, you're growing, you're contributing, which can also make you feel significance and help you connect. Right. Yep. And so you're beginning to fit all these needs. And people that studied that, Tony Robbins, Epstein, these guys that really get into those needs side, if you have something that fulfills 3 of those needs, it's easy to make that a permanent part of your life. And that's why addiction can do that. Or you see people kind of get addicted to recovery when they first sober up. And my big complaint about that, when people go, you've just switched addictions. You're going to 5 meetings a week. Yeah, well, you don't get a DUI on the way home from an AA meeting. Right. You know, you don't get shot trying to do a dope deal usually at an NA meeting. Yeah. So the happy rat park again. We've got meaningful social contribution, connection. So how do you work with that sense of how people are thinking? So these are some of the elements of that are getting supported by recovery. But how do you work with that? How do you, if you were doing NLP with somebody in particular? Well, one of the things I do is look at the internal conflict, you know, the part of them that wants to recover, and then the part of them that fights it, you know. And once you begin to look at those, that's where you see, you know, in NLP, we have we call it the visual squash, or I do. And, you know, you look at the part of you that wants to do it, and the part of you that fights it. Well, the part of you that wants to make the change, you know, is conscious. That's your conscious mind, probably, because it knows, you know, keep you out of jail, keep your family together, keep your job, right? I always say people sober up for one of the 4 L's, your lover, your liver, the livelihood, or the law. Okay? People don't just wake up and go, God damn it, I'm going to quit drinking and drugging today. Usually it's like, you know, there's a gun to your head. And so the party that wants to quit, that's conscious. But then the subconscious, the part that keeps you relapsing or using, that's the part of you that fights it, because it needs to fulfill whatever those human needs are. And it's beyond your conscious awareness. Most people don't even think about that stuff like needs and all that. So, you know, it's why they'll be sober for a little while, then they'll relapse. They'll be sober for a little while, then they'll relapse. And until those things mesh, you don't have much of a chance. And so in NLP, the first thing I would try, with hypnosis, is get them to resolve that internal conflict and begin to look at some of those drivers. I don't go and teach people how to do this. I'm just like, you know, what keeps you going back? You know, what drives you? Not why, but mainly, how the hell do you do this? You know, how do you keep drinking knowing you're about to go to prison, right? And then I'll lose myself, right? And our language, what I like about the linguistics, our language tells us what's going on. But most people look for causes or that, not just listen to the language because it's right there, you know? It's like, I remember one guy saying, you know, but when he thinks about a drink, you know, it's a hot day and suddenly he'll think about a cold beer. And all I see is this good cold beer, you know, an icy mug, an icy mug with the stuff running down the side. That's all I can see. Shit, I got thirsty listening to him talk, and I don't drink. But if you understand this thing in NLP called submodalities, he literally shut everything out in the world except that drink. That's an obsession.
Right.
And if I can get you obsessed about anything, you will do it. Mm-hmm. How do you not do it? It's all you can think about. And that's what this guy would say. Once I saw that, that's all I could think about, you know. And a person in a meeting, which not trained in NLP, he said, son, what you got to do is when you think about that drink, he did that with his hands. And he goes, you need to pull back and put that drink in its proper perspective. And then you need to think about what happened the last time, to use timeline, last time you had a drink. You got in trouble. You went to jail. If you drink today, what's going to happen tomorrow? You're going to get in trouble. You're going to go to jail. You're going to, whatever. So he did an intervention without knowing what he was doing. He'd just been sober so long, he was about to spontaneously combust, as I would say. And he pulled him out of the experience. He disassociated. It was a hypnotic technique. And I watched the kid sit there, and he leaned back when the guy did it, right? And he did that with his eyes. He did the intervention in his head. And if he could keep that, he the next time he had the thought of a drink, if he would pull back and just think about it, you know, and then maybe put, as you know, like the old anchoring thing, instead of seeing a cold beer, you know, see a glass of cow piss, right? Or something like that's not very appealing, and you're much more likely to do that, right? And so again, you know, because again, our brains do all this wonderful stuff. If we used it in the proper, in the proper way, it's gonna be more powerful. So that, you know, yeah. And then the other thing I personally strongly recommend is they get involved in the 12-step program at the beginning, just to bond. And if nothing else, where else, especially if you come from a family of addiction, whether it's alcohol, drugs, I don't care, you have no models of how not to drink or drug. Mm-hmm. You have no model of how to go to a Super Bowl party sober. That's coming up down here next week, right? You know, or a New Year's Eve party. Mm-hmm. How do you not drink on New Year's Eve? You know, I was sober a few years when I met my lovely wife, and I said, hey, you want to go to the New Year's Eve party dance? And she goes, where is it? And it was at a 12-step club. And she goes, nobody will be drinking? I go, no. And she's not an alcoholic. She goes, that's kind of strange, right? And so we went, and we had a lot of fun. And but for a normal person, you know, especially if they're an addict or an alcoholic, the idea of some of these things, Super Bowl parties, New Year's Eve, birthdays, you know, you got to learn how to do it. And my personal story for that is, you know, I think I was 24 years old, and it was the 4th of July here in the States, Independence Day. And I remember I went to a 12-step function. A bunch of sober guys got together. We did some stuff. I remember talking to my dad, and I go, you know, that's the first 4th of July I can remember not being drunk. And he was shocked. He didn't have a problem. He's like, really? I said, yeah. He goes, what about community service? I go, that was a great day, because, you know, we weren't at war when I was at the end. And so it's like, party time for the 4th of July. So you know, yeah, so that's where you could get the model on how to do that.
Well, alcohol just is saturating our culture, unless you're in a non-drinking circle.
Well, yeah, and like here in the States and in Canada, you know, the opioid epidemic's going up, and people are freaking out, and they're focusing on that. What they're not looking at is the people that are dying from alcohol poisoning.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Right. And because what happens now, it's getting harder and harder. It's why heroin went up. It's hard to buy the pain pills. It's easier to get heroin. And now that they're cracking down on that, people are self-medicating through the alcohol. And there's been a few cases down here where people, you know, they're drunk, but then they did get some pain pills, some fentanyl. And of course, you add fentanyl with alcohol, you're dead. Mm-hmm. You know, the last treatment center I ran, there was a kid there, and I was you know, his parents were kind of enabling. And I said, well, my only suggestion to you is keep your black suit, sir, ready, and ma'am, your black dress. Because one day he's going to take that pain pill and have a beer. He goes, well, I really don't drink. Yeah, but after a couple pain pills, you drink a few beers, you're dead. And the kid did die.
Oh, man.
You know, and it's like, yeah, so anyway, that's, yeah, and then the other thing is, if they think about 12-step world, is it teaches them, you know, like I say, how to bond and maybe to start to connect. And again, I've seen this over these 30-something years, people that get super involved in AA or NA, you know, for a few years, and then it kind of goes back, because I always stress AA was meant to be a bridge back to normal living. If you read Bill Wilson, the guy that started it, Dr. Bob, it was never meant to be a life in and of itself. They knew some people would make it their lives because they got nothing else to do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, great. But for some people, they get in, they get real active for a couple of years, they're stable, they're in the happy cage.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And they go to a meeting a week, you know, they got friends, and they merge back into society, which was the original desire of the 12-step world.
Right.
And it's kind of gotten hijacked by, you're either at 12 meetings a week or you're not in this program and this and that. So, you know, so I think we're seeing another rift. So,
can you talk a little bit about what underlies some of the reason why people can't change, they can't go into recovery? I'm thinking specifically of trauma. And what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, with trauma, I mean, like when you look at all the research done with post-traumatic stress, which because of what's going on, you know, when we talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, everybody first here in the States automatically, and Canada, automatically goes to the vets, right? And they start thinking about the vets, where, you know, 75% of the people who have PTSD are not veterans, right? It's, you have a car wreck, you were a victim of a violent crime, you were raped, you were attacked. And what's not interesting, but it's true, it doesn't even have to happen to you.
Right. You could just see it.
You could be, and then you'll vivify it and make it real. So you'll get the post-traumatic stress. And if you don't know how to cope with that, and they don't teach us how to cope with it, some people can just cope with it. Again, you go back to why, you know, when you look at the military, you know, when you look at who gets PTSD and who doesn't. Well, one of the things they found is when you look at special operations forces, right? They have a lower incidence of PTSD than the general military, and they see much more violence, right? So it's not necessarily the violence, it's all these other factors. It's, you know, one guy thinks it's hardening to get ready for the violence. You can't make it through the training because the training is violent. Well, you know, when I was going through some training, it caused PTSD.
Okay.
And it hardened you to it,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And again, you have that whole camaraderie when you're with the group, and those kind of units are much more cohesive than any other. So they have a tendency, not that they don't have it, some of them have it, but, and again, when you look at that, and I do know the VA is doing a good job. They're trying to figure out, well, we should be studying the people that come back from trauma that don't get PTSD.
Right.
You know? And again, a lot of it goes back, they go into a happy cage, they reconnect with their family. There's an adjustment period,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's no self-reinforcement. There's no, you know, what do you call it? Secondary gain from it. Yeah. So yeah, but I think you have to like look at the trauma and, you know, get the person to look at the trauma, and you can't you can take it away, but what you want to do is minimize the effect of the trauma and have them see it differently. You know, we call it reframing. So yes, it's a part of you. I had a lady, she started, well, she came to me for weight loss, but she had other issues. But anyway, after she lost all this weight, that was her addiction, by the way, right? And it'll come up, this will make sense in 1 minute. And She was doing fine. I lost all this weight. Fine. I get the call. Hey, Will, Dr. Will, can you help me? I go, what? She goes, I'm having anxiety attacks. Been in the hospital 3 times. I'm like, yeah, sure, come in. And she goes, and I'm starting to eat again. I'm like, okay. So she comes in. We start talking. I go, what is it? And we're gathering information. And she can't. And I'm like lost. I can't figure out what flipped her out. And she goes, I know it's not this, doc, but. And I'm like, yeah, she's going to tell me. This was several years ago. And when she was 16 in high school, so it was probably late 60s, early 70s, she worked at an ice cream parlor. And what happened at the ice cream parlor, the owner's son, guy owned a couple businesses, the ice cream shop, was home from college and was running the ice cream parlor. And she was there and she started flirting with, anyway, the guy raped her. You know, they'd fool around a little bit, but then he ended up raping her. And I said, well, what happened? She goes, nothing. I couldn't say anything. They first of all say, I'm trying to catch a rich guy. Secondly, back then, you're old enough, they go, what did you do?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah. you did. Yeah, we're still seeing it. No, you just changed your mind.
Right.
So she didn't say nothing. She even worked there the rest of the summer. Right? And I'm like, okay, so now she's a vice president, right? And she's been there forever and everything was fine. Her and her boss had to do all this work at night, right? That I don't know, you know what I mean. So yes. At night, she's in this place, and after everybody left, and they would do whatever they had to do for this merge, and she would have an anxiety attack, right? And she would end up at the hospital, think she's having a heart attack. Of course, our caring medical professionals, after the second one or third one, said, "Lady, you're nuts. Your heart is fine," right? So she calls me up, and what I said was, it's your brain taking care of you. It's not going to let you put in that position. Because as she was telling me that story, one thing she did with her hand, when I was 16, her hand went right here, right? Which means that event is right here. It's there to protect her, to never let her get in that situation again.
Exactly.
Right? And I said, we don't want to take that away. We want to put it, you're not 16, honey, you're 53. Put it back where it should be. And you're an intelligent, articulate woman. It's a different time. If something happened now, what would you do? You'd call the police. You would, if you didn't kill the guy, you would do this, that. So we did a few things, and it helped resolve the trauma. And if she hadn't, she would have went back to the food big time, because that was her self-medication. And so that's the kind of thing with trauma. And, it's usually there. A lot of the PTSD symptoms are there to try to keep your ass alive. If you've been in combat, I guarantee you for a few years after that, you hear gunshots in an unexpected place, you're hitting the deck.
Yeah.
Right? And part of that, I had one guy I was talking to about that. He goes, I'm like, do you want to fix it? And he goes, yeah. I go, okay, we need to reframe a few things, but actually this is a pretty good thing. Yeah. So
I find that too. A lot of what's going on is just a defense mechanism. We have some experience or evidence that we need to protect ourselves, and this is a way to do it. And so that's what keeps happening. Yeah.
And then the addiction, the alcohol, the drugs, food, gambling, sex, whatever the addiction is, that's a self-medication tool.
Right.
If I have a few drinks, I can handle working with this guy, rather than, do some other things.
Yeah. So you described a reframing using that image. How would you work with someone with auditory and with kinesthetic predominance?
Well, with auditory, you could change the voice, right? If it's a voice that sets you off. A reframe I did with a lady that wanted to strangle her daughter, right? When her daughter would go, "Mom," I can't do it, but the teenage "Mom," and then the visual was roll her eyes, but the voice, she goes, the voice, I could just hear it, and it freaks me out, right? So what we did is we went in her head and we turned it into Minnie Mouse's voice.
Oh.
And then it just made her laugh, which then it was funny, because then she took control, because at that she figured out then the minute her daughter did that, she gave control to her daughter, because she went bat crap crazy, And then her daughter had control. So the next time it happened, it became self-reinforcing because she heard the Minnie Mouse voice. She started laughing, which made the daughter mad, which made her laugh more. And then eventually the daughter kind of tapped down. And then when it would come up, I go, she's a teenager. She's going to do that. Mom, and it took away the power. So that's an auditory one. The kinesthetic one, where do you feel it in your body? And what most people don't realize, when they have a feeling in their body, and that's really how your subconscious talks to you anyways, through feelings. So, where do you feel it in your body? And what if you move it? Right? What if it goes from your crushing feeling into your chest to your hand, or you begin to move it around? And people don't realize they can move the sensory experiences, right? And if you tie it into the other things, when you think about a kinesthetic, then you can do what we call synesthesia and say, okay, you feel this is like an elephant on your black weight on your chest. Okay, well, you feel the big weight on your chest. What color is it? Black. It's heavy. It's crushing. Does it have a sound? It's like a trash compactor. Well, what if you change the sound and now you change the picture and then you move it? It shifts the feeling. Because unfortunately, what happens to most of us, we get farther into the feeling, which amplifies it. Which is what most normal people do in conversation. Tell me about it. Oh my God, that's terrible.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, or I've seen people reinstall a phobia in somebody when they go, hey, Lynn, do you remember when you used to have that fear of spiders? My God, remember the last time you freaked out and they reinstall it and you were fine before that. Right?
So the work that I do, we do a lot of work with images and words, and sometimes images of words, like seeing it written out, and in the body, the feelings. And I find that a lot of people are afraid of the feelings in our body. How do you work with that? Is that your experience?
Oh yeah, I've got somebody I've been working with for quite a while, and it's about, and again, what you could look at, what was the driver to get into the feelings? Maybe as a little kid you were taught not to feel. We don't feel. We're men in America, especially Southern culture. No, we shake hands, we don't hug,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, yeah, they're afraid of the feelings because they never had their feelings. They weren't taught. Again, going back to how you're raised, and there's no blame, parents or grandparents. It's just whatever it was. It's just you're not taught how to process the feelings, right? Mm-hmm. Generally, not to sound sexist, but generally men have that issue more than women, but women have it too. But again, are you taught it's okay to have feelings? Is it maybe you've never had a safe place to have a feeling? One of the things I found quite effective, and I forgot who I got this from. Maybe it was John Grinder, where you create in their mind like a safe room where they can experience feelings for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And then check it out, and then just like taste the feelings, or just get a little bit, see what it's like in a safe environment in their mind, right? And again, it's why people get into recovery groups, spiritual groups. Hell, it's one of the reasons people could join a cult, because it might be the first place you can experience whatever those feelings are, and they're encouraged. Right. Where someone says, they let you process it out, because we're generally not. And it's becoming worse because of
our phones,
which is a disassociated thing.
Yeah.
And now it's almost becoming, one guy says this will be interesting, he'd like to see psychology in 100 years doing emoji therapy. Smiley face to smiley face, or what? Well, we don't know what our brain's going to do. This guy did this really cool stuff. He was just saying, and he goes, you'll laugh at me now, but he's one convinced in 50 years we won't have much spoken word. So
one of the things that I find very interesting is the recognition of how important connection is. So if you have someone who really had their experience in life is connection is harmful, people around them have been hurting them or abandoning them or neglecting them, and they have found their way to connection through drinking and drugs. So how do you work with someone who really doesn't trust other people?
Well, I think the first thing is A, to acknowledge it, but then B, to realize you, the one guy that really talks about, addiction is a disease of non-connection. But he says, thing I was reading, that he suggests to people doing this kind of work with other people is don't worry about them connecting with other people at first. Get them to connect with themselves, especially with addictions, because a few beers, drugs, food, even sex, gambling, it's a disassociation experience,
True.
right? And so first you got to get them to associate or connect with themselves, right? Because they don't know how to connect with themselves, then to connect with other people. And again, going back to trying to do it in a safe place, it's why, again, I always use my history of like the 12-step world, why back in the old days, when, like the guy that I was hung out with in the early 80s who sobered up in the 50s, he talked about, man, they had this red line, men with men, women with women, right? Because he goes, human nature gets involved. So again, you have trouble connecting. You go to a meeting, I'm friendly to you, you start to connect. If it goes south a little bit, then now you're not, it's gonna harden your disconnection to other people. Right?
Now you have more evidence that it's not.
Yes, and I used to hear a lot, and I don't hear it like I used to. I'm beginning to hear it again. Is, hey, somebody coming to the program, just remember, these are the same people that drank in the bars, that hung out in the dope houses. They may have ulterior motives. Just keep that in mind, And then how to, and again, and this flips back to the addiction nature, which is when I go all in, I go all in. I'm ready to connect with everybody. And even though I don't know what I'm doing, because you're still taking that like bar dope house mentality, and you want to overconnect, and then you get burned, which makes you pull back. And again, from talking to people that really get that long-term recovery, especially in the 12-step world or the spiritual world, they learn how to reconnect on a safe level, maybe first with friends, with guy friends, or with, women with girlfriends, and then go to the next level and then out from there.
Right. So you were speaking earlier about neuroscience. How do you work with resourcing people around their brains? And I noticed in your book, you were talking about anchoring resourceful states.
Well, yeah, because your brain, well, one of the things too is, they like, when you start having a craving, what's happening is your dopamine's going up, right? Which puts you on edge. That's why like when everybody's diet is good until the middle of the afternoon when they're hungry, right? Then you'll eat anything. That's because your dopamine's up and you go into, I gotta resolve this. and so your serotonin drops, and then you eat or you do whatever, and they regulate a little bit, right? And so, but what else can regulate your brain chemicals, right? That's the thing. And one of the things that happens when you're in a resourceful state, you have a tendency to self-regulate. Your brain will regulate, right? So there was a study done in the 70s called the relaxation response by Dr. Benson. And when he studied the transcendental meditation, TM, and how they didn't know what the neurochemicals were, they had no clue. But what they found were the people that practiced TM on a regular basis, they had some interesting side effects. Their health was better and physiologically younger, but they gave up smoking. If they were doing a lot of drugs and alcohol, they quit doing that. Like I remember when the Beatles got into it, while they were doing it, they didn't do drugs. They just quit, right? Because it regulated, it made you feel content, right? And so meditation will do it. So it'll regulate your brain chemicals. Hypnosis will do it. It's why if you hypnotize somebody in the middle of the day that's never been hypnotized, I guarantee you 90% their first response when you say open your eyes, they open their eyes and they go, It's because it may be the first time in years, if ever, that their brains hit that level during the day.
Oh, okay.
Right? The other thing that will self-regulate is the herd mentality. When you get in a group of people like-minded, your brain will set with them, to whoever the alpha is in the group. And so if it's a calm group, you walk in there, you like when you take a cow, and if you take a cow and you separate it from the herd and you scare the shit out of it and you let it back, it goes into the middle of the herd and then its brain drops. When it's out there being, it's dopamine's, it's terrified, right? The dogs are chasing it. Gets in the herd, it calms. So that's why, again, going back to 12-step world, they always say, if you can make it to a meeting tonight, you may make it. Because you're tense, you're nervous, you're ready to drink. And I don't know how many people I've heard say, if I may, I'll drink after this meeting. And then they go to the meeting and they're fine.
Right.
Which in a way doesn't make sense because they had 3 cups of coffee and smoked 4 cigarettes. But their brain regulated. So you have meditation, you have prayer will do it. Therapy will do it because it's the decompression feeling. Hypnosis, altered states. When you're in a powerful state, you're doing a sport, you're doing that, your brain chemicals regulate, right? So what we want to do is look for ways to teach people to self-regulate. The deep breath and a drink of water, all these things. And so that's the neurochemicals. One of the little things I found interesting lately is people have read a book on neurochemicals or neuroplasticity and this, and then I'm listening to them talk and I'm like, this isn't what, I don't know what they've done, but it sells products. I can say that.
Okay.
But yeah, but when you do that, and again, maybe that's one of those things that the people that make it in recovery learn how to self-regulate their things. Because also too, if your dopamine goes up and you're in the craving mode and you're an addict, and the only way you know how to regulate is to have a drink. Well, you have a drink for a while, you do feel better, right? Let's face it. And then you start feeling guilty, which raises your dopamine because I shouldn't have done that. So then you go back, you drink more, and you're stuck in this cycle. That's why true addiction, when you're in it, you can't stop. Someone usually has to intervene. You have to pass out, you have to get arrested. Something usually has to happen, right? Especially with alcohol and drugs, but even food. That's what people get on, guys and some girls that have like porn addiction. It just keeps going and going and going. Because they're stuck in this brain cycle. I get stimulated, now I need to release, but what I used to release now makes me feel guiltier. Where a normal person's all stressed out, they come home, they have a martini, they're good to go.
Right. So their brains are not stuck in that self-regulation cycle.
Yeah, and Dr. Rednick, I think, I always pronounce his name wrong. He talks about in the book, The Craving Brain, that we've trained ourselves to have a maladaptive response cycle. And then you add in the terrible food, the too much sugar, we don't exercise, there's no good air. I mean, all that adds to it,
Right.
So.
Right. So what would you suggest for someone who might be listening to this that's new in recovery or not in recovery yet, but wanting to get into recovery? What are some basics for them?
Well, I would suggest that what they have to do is the hardest thing to do is reach out for help, right? If first time you have to do it is hard to go get any kind of help. And then when you're in recovery, if you're stuck, if you're miserable, you didn't sober up to be miserable, right? Somewhere in that old literature, it says we absolutely positively insist on enjoying life, right? If you're not, then something's not working. And so you need to step back and get some help that might get you to that level, right? And then, whether that's therapy, whether it's joining a meditation group, something to start changing your brain. It's like all the current research, why mindfulness works. And everybody act like this new thing. And I'm like, well, it's just meditation, for God's sakes. But, it's a different package. People like it. So that's good. And, with the current world, there's a lot of studies and stuff that are pointing out that we have to redo a lot of our treatments, right? Especially for younger people. To get a young person to go away to treatment for 21, 28 days is getting it harder and harder, right? For a lot of reasons, right? So but we haven't changed it. That model hasn't changed, especially here in the States, as it's driven by insurance, and right now they're still paying, so they're still doing that model. The current trend, and when I talk about it, people either love the idea or they go crazy, which is virtual therapy, kind of like we're doing now. You know, getting on a Zoom meeting, on a face-to-face, and doing it that way at your convenience. So you don't have to take, you know, drive an hour to come to my office to spend 40 minutes and then drive an hour back. So you're taking a half a day off. And in the current work environment, your boss may not like that.
Right.
Or if you took 28 days off, you may not have a job when you come back. So there's that. And also the younger people, the millennials, under 40, and even I'll give us a boost here, me and you, people our age that are tech savvy are getting very comfortable with this. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we prefer it, you know, can't I just do the session online?
Right.
That way I can be in my house. I go, sure, as long as it's quiet, we can do it. Good. You're in your own safe environment, right? So virtual treatment, you know, I remember when it was phone treatment, but now it's like this. And of course, some of the bureaucracies are fighting it, but it's going to happen. Right. And, you know, that's why I got involved in this thing called Live Free training. And it's a 21-day approach, but it's videos, audios, and live classes like this. We do the classes via Zoom because it's HIPAA compliant. Mm-hmm. And so we can work around your schedule. So, and also going back to our connection, you know, if we can get people better where they are, they have a better success rate. Because that's why all of us have seen people go away to treatment, do great, 28, 30, 60 days, because they're loved, they're pampered, and they come home and the shit hits the fan right when they walk in the door, and they weren't reconnecting with their family or their employer, and now they're like, and they're different, but they see them the same, and right? And I've always thought you had a better chance of really sobering, and it felt hypocritical because I ran treatment centers. You had a better chance if you went through outpatient treatment and just went to meetings, because then you could begin to alter your home environment, work on your relationship with your significant other, your kids, your employer, while you're in the moment, rather than be dropped into it. So this virtual treatment, if you want to call it that, remote treatment, I think it's the wave of the future. And so that's, you know, we Live Free Training, livefreetraining.org. We have that, several other people, and I think it's taken off, and the efficacy seems as good or better than anything else, right? So that's it, but I say reach out somewhere.
Right.
And if nothing else, start, and God, great thing about the internet, you could Google, you know, go to YouTube and start listening to some hypnosis, self-hypnosis, some NLP techniques. Just start doing that to change your mindset. And also, and when I say this next, I'm saying this to myself, turn off the damn news, right? And focus on getting better. You know, listen to an audiobook. Do motivational things, you know, from Tony Robbins to Brandon Bouchard to Deepak Chopra to the old days of Nightingale Conant. Start listening to stuff to change your mindset, right? Because again, when I looked at the people that really recovered, as it says in the 12-step program, and Carl Jung said, you have to have a psychic awakening, right? He called it like a spirit, but he talked about you have to think different, right? And again, if nothing changes, nothing changes. But instead of listening to the radio on the way to work, you know, listen to an audiobook, listen to something motivational. Of course, don't do a hypnosis tape while you're driving, but do something like that, right? And do that. And here's one thing I guarantee will change everyone's day. Before you go to sleep at night, if you spend 15 minutes watching or listening to something that makes you laugh, you will sleep deeper, your brain rejuvenates more, right? Because you're not, it's just, it could be whatever, you know, I'm a Family Guy. My wife hates it, but I'll watch Family Guy before I'm going to bed because it makes me laugh. I can go to sleep easy and I sleep better because we need to, again, it's about reprogramming your brain. You don't want to go to sleep, drift off thinking all those negative thoughts, you know, just that one little shift, right? You could turn on a subliminal tape when you're going to sleep because the research is wonderful on subliminals. Mm-hmm. It's wonderful, you know. And now with YouTube, you can just pick, there it is. You can listen to it while you go to sleep. It'll play a nice subliminal while you're drifting off. So yes, do that and it'll start changing your mindset.
I'd like to see if you have any favorite quotes. Do you like quotes? Something inspires you?
Yeah. Yes. One is, and if I misquote it, nobody shoot me. Between stimulus and response, there is a moment. And in that moment is our ability to choose. In our choice lies our destiny. And I think it's something slightly different, but it's from Viktor Frankl. And there's a guy that you want to read an inspiring book, you know, his whole, not just his whole family, his whole existence got wiped out in World War II. His village, the whole area, they killed everybody. Mm-hmm. And he comes out and spends the rest of his life studying forgiveness and love. I'll tear up. How did he do that?
Right.
And he said something snapped. He goes, if I make it out of here, anger will kill me. And I'm like, and so, you know, and that quote to me, and it sums up what we do between stimulus and response. Okay, I see a Budweiser, right? It's my water. But you see a drink, it doesn't mean you have to drink.
Right.
Right? There's a pause, there's a moment. You're a bit, and to me, my quote I made up, responsibility is the ability to respond. Mm-hmm. And you can choose how you want to respond. You don't have to respond, you know. Again, go to like Nelson Mandela, although 28 years in prison, comes out and hugs his captors.
Right.
Right? And, you know, so that's the kind of thing. But I love somewhere I used to have that whole quote, but the Viktor Frankl, that between stimulus and response, there's a moment, and in that moment is our ability to choose. In our choice lies our destiny. Right. And yeah, because, okay, and that means we do create, whether you're into The Secret, whether you're into Law of Attraction, whether you're into this, you're kind of creating everything as you go.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So where can people get a hold of you? You mentioned.
Well, I'm the clinical director of an organization called livefreetraining.org. Just
livefreetraining.org. Okay.
Yeah. And it's a resource too. There's all kinds of videos and cool stuff you can get. And you can always get me at an organization called NFNLP, NFNLP, and that stands for National Federation of Neuro-Linguistic Programming. And that's my training site that I do trainings and development. For the last 20 years, I've kind of become the default NLPer to the NLPer, the hypnotist to the hypnotist. So it's kind of what I do. Probably 80% of the people I coach or work with are somehow in the mental health world. Mm-hmm. So, you know, because I'll close with, it's called the paradox of knowledge. What's interesting is knowledge is wonderful, but what happens to some of us, something happens and we get a change. We get hypnosis, we get NLP, we get enlightening. Oh my God, this is cool. And you start studying it. But the bad part, once you start studying it, it doesn't work the same for you anymore sometimes. Someone starts to do a technique on you and you start going, I like that. Let me write that down. Oh, I can use that for this. So you analyze, you don't experience. And so that's the paradox of knowledge where, you know, you want to be able to balance those. And that's why we're always doing that. And again, when you get into recovery, and I'll close with the people that make it long-term realize it's never over. Mm-hmm. You know, they don't know everything. Those I see have trouble think, I got nothing to work on here.
Ah, right.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, there's that denial.
yeah.
Mhm. Well, thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure to have you on the show.
That
And
was fun.
yeah, it was great to hear from you. And, I love talking with people who have this length of experience and, your training, your education, and all of this experience. And you just have such insight into the new things that can help and the things that are always helpful to really get into how can we change this brain of ours and go into recovery and in a happy life, not just that subsistence.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm finally starting to figure it out.
Awesome. That's great. Well,
The
thank you.
more I learn, the less I know.
That's
So,
true.
all right.
Well, thank you so much. That was great having you on.
Thank you. Godspeed. God bless.
All right. Bye for now. Go to kilobicenter.com, Radical Recovery Summit. For access to the interviews, you can watch them free online for 48 hours after they air, or you could purchase an all-access pass. kilobicenter.com.